All right, welcome to the Red Alert Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Chap. Today, we're going to be talking about a variety of topics regarding the Detroit Red Wings because this is probably the most interesting time to be a Detroit Red Wings fan because there's so much on the line so early. You know, you think about it like this: you lost all three in the California trip. You lost to Anaheim and San Jose, who are two of the worst teams in the NHL. You lose a game against the LA Kings, which you should not have lost that game, but you got brutally beat. And then you play 5 out of 6 at home coming up, and that's gonna be a big stretch. We'll get to that in a minute, but I wanna address a report that Spittin' Chicklets had about the whole Sergei Fedorov potentially becoming the Detroit Red Wings, head coach if they do fire Lalone. Obviously, if you've been following this podcast for a while, we've been telling you about Derek Lalone's woes in November and December. And if it's any indication of where this team could go in terms of if they're going to go to the playoffs or not, it usually rides on November and December. I'm going to look up his statistics later on. I'm going to post on the Red Alert podcast page. But if you go back over all his November and Decembers, I guarantee you it's like 200, 300 win percentage. It's not that great. So if Stevie Y wants to make a move, obviously he hasn't made it yet. It's November 20th. Next week is Thanksgiving. So if there's going to be a time to make a move, you look at the schedule and you're going to be playing the New York Islanders at home. I don't think you're going to fire alone after that. Uh, you're playing a game pretty much every other day. So this stretch right here in November is probably going to be what determines Alone's fate in terms of the November schedule. Because if you look at those 4 home games, 3 of them should be winnable. The New Jersey Devils game is going to be chintzy. They're a really good team. But the New York Islanders on the road in New York is a game that should be also a win. And if you look at the standings say what the standings say. 16 points, and you're about 5 points back of Tampa Bay. You're 3 points back of the 4th place. So if you just get on a little bit of a run here, you could really make up ground. But regarding the report about Stevie Y potentially going to Sergei Fedorov, why would it make sense? Well, here's a couple reasons why it would make sense for the Detroit Red Wings to change course and go to Sergei Fedorov. If you ever watch Sergei Fedorov's teams in the KHL, they're a very aggressive team offensively. Very aggressive. Um, if you've been listening to this podcast at any point, I've been telling you one thing that lacks with this Detroit Red Wings team is obviously we know that the Detroit Red Wings do not have the defense that you would need to be successful in the NHL. It's a lot of old defensemen, a lot of defensemen that are really bad with the puck in their own end. And you got offensive players who could really make things happen. DeBrincat, Larkin. Larkin's on pace for like 50 goals right now. Um, Patrick Kane, Tarasenko. I mean, even you go Fabry, Casper, all those guys. There's an ability there to be an offensive gifted team. And it's not going to win you a Stanley Cup. And there's no doubt about it that if you're going to win a Stanley Cup, you're going to have to shift your philosophy to more of a defensive approach. But we've seen with the Florida Panthers, like they won the Stanley Cup. Obviously, they had good goaltending with Sergei Bobrovsky, but they were an aggressive team on the forecheck, which led them to spend a lot of time in the offensive zone. This was from a couple weeks ago when I told you that the Detroit Red Wings are spending 40% of their time uh, in all strengths in the offensive zone and 39% on even strength. So it's not good by any stretch of the imagination when you look at those statistics and I mean those splits. Obviously, you're below average on even strength, and you're just league average, just below league average in all strength. So when we came into this game, this series of games in a 3-game stretch against the California teams, I thought this would be the biggest point of the Detroit Red Wings season. And, you know, obviously losing all 3 and they didn't make the change is a little bit disheartening because I don't think you can really wait. But if Stevie is gonna wait, he's gonna wait. And I mean, I look at the schedule right now, every other day. Um, you would thought that making the move would have been Tuesday or Wednesday. We're recording this podcast on a Wednesday, but this will come out for you on Thursday. But you look at the way this team plays. Um, they're a much better team when they are playing um, aggressive. You know, if you go back to last February, last January, why were they so good at that point in time? Because they were aggressive. You know, if you look at back at some of those games, they had to be aggressive because they were falling behind, and they were really, really aggressive. And yes, they did give up some chintzy goals, but the team's not built to really play a defensive style hockey game. It's just not the way it is. As you know, there's been multiple things that the Detroit Red Wings have done that have led to this point where you look at it and you go, okay, um, obviously, you know, in year 6 of the rebuild. You're hoping that you have the better players. Obviously, Sandine Pellikka is going to be coming next year, potentially. We see Edvinsson this year. He came late last year. I think he should have been called up a little bit earlier than that, but bygones be bygones. Edvinsson's up right now. But it just goes to show your two best defensemen are your young kids, Edvinsson and Seider. Um, your your three worst defensemen are Justin Hall, Petrie, Sherratt, and they were free agent signings. And then you look at the free agent signing of Gustafsson in exchange for Shane Gottsberg hasn't really worked out in Detroit Red Wings' favor either. So if there's any point in this, you kind of look at it like, okay, off pro, the way that the free agency has been handled hasn't been great. The way they're drafting has been phenomenal. Sider, Raymond, Casper, Edmondson, Kosa, Augustine, like Bolchenikov. There's a lot of good players that are going to come, but it's taken a little more time than everyone would hope. So in the meantime, you have an opportunity, if you would choose to do so, to draft, not draft, but get rid of a coach like Derek Lalonde and go to a more aggressive coach. And I think with Sergey is the thing that's interesting about Sergey is there was 1 year that he won the championship in the KHL, which winning a championship in the KHL is not something that I gloss over. I say, oh, that's a remarkable achievement. We all know the KHL is the KHL for a reason. But I was talking to someone who does know the KHL pretty well, and what he said is, what Sergey's first year, that team was not supposed to win anything. They're brutally bad. And Sergey made him into an aggressive team that chased the forecheck. They were pressuring the puck. What ended up having happening is they forced takeaways. They got a lot of odd man rushes. They started shooting more, and then they started to do better. And I think it was the year after when they really took off. I forget if it was the year after or that year they started to take off. I don't know. I have to look at it. But he said there was a point in time where you've seen the remarkable improvement of that team that he was coaching. And he said he would be great with the Detroit Red Wings because that same team he took over within the KHL kind of mirrored the Detroit Red Wings. They were not a good defensive team. The old coach was a defensive style coach, and he turned them into a more aggressive offensive team that really flourished at the end of the year, and they kind of got close. They're way better than they when they started at the beginning of the year. So if you did go to Sergei Fedorov, if the rumor mill is true with the spitting chicklets, uh, the rumor boys as they call them, uh, if it is true, I think it would be a home run. I know people look at Joe Quenneville. I'm not interested in Gerard Gallant. Everywhere he's went, he's been at a disaster. Look what he did with Lafreniere and with the Rangers. Look what he did in Vegas, where he kind of. There's a point in time where Gerard Gallant you get sick of him, and that's the issue with Gerard Gallant. Obviously, Montgomery's out there now, so there's a lot of opportunity for Mr. Eiserman to strike. But This stretch right here is going to be crucial for him. It's a huge stretch for him. The next 5 of 6 are at home, so this is a big stretch for the Red Wings in terms of what they've been doing. I mean, you go back and you look at them winning the Pittsburgh game, and then we go back to that, and you go, they won 3 out of 5, looked pretty promising, and then they lost 3 straight. It's never been a consistent product with the Detroit Red Wings. That was an old graphic, but it's never been a consistent product with the Detroit Red Wings. They win a couple games and then they lose a couple games. They win a couple games, they lose a couple games. And part of the reason that they win some of these games is because the goaltending has been so good. I mean, this is another one, but Cam Talbot and Alex Line have been fantastic for the Detroit Red Wings. So this is a huge stretch for the Detroit Red Wings coming up. I think this is a stretch that you really can't downplay in terms of what this stretch will mean for the Detroit Red Wings and what it'll mean for Derek Lalonde. And obviously, if you go back and you look at Derek Lalonde's stats in November and December, wins and losses, pretty brutal. It's like 300. I was doing the quick math. I think it's like 350 or 375. It's a brutal stretch that he usually has had the last 2 years. And once, it's like, okay, once you're like, all right, anomaly. Second time it happens, okay, this is something to look at. The third time it happens, I mentioned this on a season preview on the Red Alert podcast. I told you November and December would be the biggest months for Derek Lalonde in his whole coaching career because we know exactly what Derek Lalonde has done in his coaching career with the Detroit Red Wings. They fizzled out in November, December. They get hot in January and February, and then they fizzle out again in March. We've seen that last year where they were going towards the playoffs, and then at the end of the year, they fell out. There's a reason for that. It's not just some happenstance. There's a clear and identified reason for their struggles in these months. It's imperative. One year me and Cindy, we talked about, oh, Cider and Raymer were having a bad month. Okay, cool. Last year was what the hell is happening? Then they get Patrick Kane and then they start to take off. It just, it's a little bit boggles my mind. I obviously came this year, I thought playoffs were the objective for this Detroit Red Wings team. They have fell way short of where I thought they would be at this quarterway point. I thought they would be a lot. I thought they would be a lot better, lot better position than they are right now. I'm almost stumbling on my words because it's pretty shocking to me that the way they've lost. When you think about losing to the Anaheim Ducks in the way that you lost, when you think about losing the way you lost against the San Jose Sharks, the way you lost, it's pretty brutal to take. And if you think about it, like just gloss over it. It started off really rocky in the game one, and there were some of the same things that we saw later in the year with the Detroit Red Wings that were rearing its ugly head. And now they're rearing its ugly head again, and you're like, okay, this has got to stop. This can't happen like this. But this is what we're seeing right now, and this is a huge stretch for the Detroit Red Wings in terms of where they're gonna go, what they're going to do. But if the rumor mill is true and they do make a change, one, it might be too late because if you go on a losing streak right now, I mean, I know Stevie's got to have his hand on the trigger right now. He's got to have his hand on the trigger right now because if they lose 2 straight, if they lose to New York and they lose to Boston, or they lose to Boston and New York, lose to Boston on Saturday, and they lose to New York on a Monday, going into Thanksgiving. I mean, it's not the way. Yeah, got to think about making the move. It just is the way it is. There's no time to wait because if you look at the standings, you're not far from making the playoffs, but you're at the bottom right now. So it's a crucial time for the Detroit Red Wings in this next 5 games. They're at home. There's 5 out of 6 that are at home. It'll be very, very interesting to see what they do in this 5 out of 6 games that they got at home. But if you are Heisman and you're thinking about am I going to make this move? Sergey Fedorov, Derek Lalonde. It's got to be quick. You can't wait. If you see one sign of distress with this team, quick pull, pull, and that's just the way it has to go. You know, we've seen teams get fire a coach and they go on a run. It's not the it's not personal. It's just strictly business. And the Detroit Red Wings have not been a good team all year long. I mean, there's been glimpses where you're like, okay, they're going to turn it around right here. They're going to turn around right here. They don't really turn around. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in this next 5 out of 6 games. But man, oh man, this is a huge turning point for the Detroit Red Wings in their season here at the quarterway point. As soon as we get to Thanksgiving, it'll be the quarterway point, and it'll be interesting to see where they are on Thanksgiving Eve, how close they are to being out, how close they are to being in, and what they have to do to get back in the fold. But we'll talk more about the Detroit Red Wings, and we'll talk about the stretch coming up. Obviously, we talked a little bit about it with this rumor mill that's coming out with Sergey Fedorov potentially coming to the Detroit Red Wings as a head coach. We'll talk about the stretch coming up and how big it could be. That's next on the Red Alert Podcast. All right, welcome back to the Red Alert Podcast. Let's go through some of the games that we have coming up with. Just deep dive into some of these games. Starting today, we'll be posting this podcast on Thursday, when the Detroit Red Wings will play the New York Islanders. The New York Islanders are 7-7-5, 19 points, 19 games. They're -7 in the goal differential. You are -14 in the goal differential. And on the road, New York is 5-4-1. They're 2-3-2 at home, which you will play them at home. And in the last 10, they're 4-3-3. The New York Islanders are. So this is a good chance for the Detroit Red Wings to potentially split the series. If you really want to be technical, the game at home is probably going to be a huge game for the Detroit Red Wings, because if you look at it from a pragmatic approach, you're going to be playing Boston. They just replaced their coach. Their coach is Joe Sacco now. Montgomery is out. When you think about those guys, it's going to be interesting to see what happens from that standpoint, because Boston's 4-4-2 in their last 10. And then you go back on the road to play the New York Islanders at 7:30, and again, they have a 2-3-2 record at home. They're better on the road, so that game that is at home on Thursday is a huge game in terms of not having to really rely on splitting and having to win on the road. And then Boston, they're 3-5 on the 3-5-1 on the road, so you have to that'd be a chance to be a very good chance to win that game, because look, these 2 games coming up, New York and Boston, are the biggest games of the season. They're the biggest games of the season. Biggest games of the season in terms of what could happen. And then you're going to play the Calgary Flames on Thanksgiving Eve. The Calgary Flames have 23 points. They have won. They have 23 points. The one goal -1 goal differential, 7-3, and they're at home, but they're going to be on the road, so they're going to be 3-3-3. And in the last 10, they've been 5-3-2. So if you look at it from that approach, they're going to be a tough team to play. They've been surprisingly good. A lot of people pegged them to be a rebuilding team, but they've really turned a corner. And then you're going to play the New Jersey Devils, who, let's be honest, they're a good team. They're 7-3-0 in their last 10. They are 8-4 on the road. They're 4-3-2 at home. They are in third in the Metro, and they play a pretty good brand of good. They're good. It's a good brand of hockey that team plays. And if you want to look at the stats, if you look at like who's teams, the teams that you're going to be playing against that are going to be the players you really want to look out for the Islanders. It is Kyle Palmieri. He leads the Islanders in points. Obviously, he leads the team in goals. Him and Anders Lee and Brock Nelson all have 7 apiece. And then you look at their goaltending that they have in New York, and obviously Sorokin has been playing out of his mind like he usually does. Um, but it's been kind of a pedestrian year for him in terms of goals against average. He has a 2.70. Varlamov has been better, but Sorokin's save percentage is 913, which has been a lot better. And Sorokin has 4 wins. So when you look at that, and then you look at the Boston Bruins, obviously they traded Linus Ullmark last year. Jeremy Swayman's having a really rough year for the Boston Bruins. 347 goals against average. Jonas Corposello, a 2.74 goals against average. Both of these goalies have been struggling. 901 save percentage and 884 save percentage for Jeremy Swayman, who just got that big deal. And then you look at the shutouts, but each has had a 1. And look, Boston's been struggling a little bit, so that's a chance to get there. There's a chance for a lot of goals in that one. Obviously, we went over the New York Islanders and their statistics. If we go over the Calgary Flames and their statistics, their leaders, you have Rasmus Andersson, the defenseman, has 12 points. Huberdeau has 10 points. Nazem Kadri has 10 points, and Michael Backlund has a 9. You look at goals. Huberdeau leads the team with 6 goals, 5 goals for Rasmus Andersson. Nazem Kadri has had 5 goals. He's been pretty good too. And Matt Coronado has had 5 goals as well. Their assist guy is the guy who played for the Vancouver Canucks last year, Andrei Kuzmenko. He's been playing pretty well. Kevin Bahl has 6 assists as well. And Kadri's been having a really, really good year for the Calgary Flames. Anthony Mantha is on the Calgary Flames. He's in the top 5 of their penalty minutes. So it's a very interesting thing. The guy to watch out for when they're on the power play is Mackenzie Weegar, their defenseman. He has 2 power play goals on the season. Kadri, Kuzmenko, Anderson, Sharon Govich have 1. You're going to see a lot of Rasmus Andersson and Mackenzie Weegar and Michael Backlund. Those are the guys that lead their team in time on ice. And then you look at the goals against. Their goaltending has been spectacular for the Calgary Flames. Dustin Wolf, who is a kid, he's in his rookie year, a 2.36 goals against average. Dan Vildar, a 2.65 goals against average. You look at their save percentage. Dustin Wolf with a 925 save percentage. Dan Vildar with a 906 save percentage. It's a pretty stout team. And when you look at those stats, you kind of think about those kids are really good for the Calgary Flames. And they were not expected to be good. And that's a hell of a coaching job by their coach. You look at the New Jersey Devils. Jasper Brett, Jack Hughes, and Nico Hischier are in the top 3 of their points. In the top 3 of their goals is Nico Hischier, Stefan Nazin, and Jasper Brett with 10, 8, 9, and 8. And Jack Hughes is at 8 as well. He's a menace. Assists, again, you got Dougie Hamilton. The Jersey Devils, they got a lot of talent, so they're gonna be tough. They're gonna be a tough team to play on that Friday after Thanksgiving. And then you look at their goalies. Jake Allen's having a surprisingly good year, 916 save percentage, 230 goals against average. Even Markstrom, who is their backup, they kind of split time, but 907 save percentage, 2.58 goals against, and you compared them to the Detroit Red Wings goalies. I mean, they're both better than the Detroit Red Wings goalies because Cam Talbot's at 2.40 goals against average, 2.78. Well, let's update the numbers because now, well, what Imagine a Week makes. 314 goals against average for Alex Lyon and 2.67 for Cam Talbot. 920 save percentage for Cam Talbot and 903 for Alex Lyon. So you look at the schedule coming up and you look at the teams that you're playing. You're playing a team like the New Jersey Devils. They could put the puck in the net. You look at a team like the Calgary Flames. They've been a surprising team. They've been one of the more surprising teams in the NHL. They're surprising, but they're going to be pretty good. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens with this Detroit Red Wings team because these next 3 games are huge. They're huge for this team because you don't want to rely on winning against Calgary or winning against New Jersey, even though those are home games. Those are 2 tough teams at the back end of this this 5-game stretch. So it'll be very interesting for what the Detroit Red Wings are trying to do and what happens with the coach because you look at these next 5 games that they have, and then the 6th game is I think is I believe is Monday. They're gonna be playing. This is because it rolls over into a new month. Yeah, it'll be Sunday. They'll play at 12:30 at home against the Vancouver Canucks, and that's another team that's you don't want to rely on beating them then because the Vancouver Canucks. I mean, you look at their team. Lankinen has have it. He's been a beast, but 2.71 goals against average. They've been struggling a little bit. They're fifth in their division, 21 points. They've been a pretty good team as of late. They're just 5-5-5. But on the road, the Vancouver Canucks are 6-1 on the road. So 5 out of your next 6 are at home. 3 of those are really tough games. So you don't want to really rely on those last 3 games because Calgary, Vancouver, New Jersey, those are games that you really just don't want to rely on. You don't want to rely on winning those games because if you do, you could potentially get yourself into some trouble. Potentially. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in this stretch. I mean, obviously, they start with New York today. They play Boston on Saturday. Monday they play New York and New York. You come home for the annual Thanksgiving Eve game. After Thanksgiving, you play the Devils at 3 o'clock, and then you play Vancouver on Sunday, which that should be it's a 12:30 game, so it's an interesting time, especially with football coming on, because I'm going to be juggling both at that time, so it'll be very very interesting with that because if you get to the Vancouver game and you need to win that game, I think at least if you're trying to be pessimistic, if you're trying to be, what does Detroit need to do to, salvage themselves in this 6-game stretch? They have to go 4-2. They have to win 4 games. If they go 4-1-1, that's even better. If they go 4-0-2, that's even better. But they have to win some more games than they've won. And obviously, if Derek Lalonde's going to save his job, this is a really tough stretch to try to save your job. When you think about the teams that are coming in, these next 3 games are huge for Derek Lalonde. Point blank, this is going to be what makes him or breaks him, in my opinion. Oh, I forgot. It's Sunday after Thanksgiving. The Lions don't play, so I'm good. But 12:30, that Vancouver game will be interesting because Vancouver's been playing well on the road. It's just it's an interesting time for the Detroit Red Wings. Obviously, we talked about the rumor of Sergei Fedorov coming to the Detroit Red Wings. We talked about where they are in the standings, but you look at some of these teams that are coming in: the Devils, the Flames, the Canucks. They're teams that can easily beat you. The way that Detroit's been playing, I mean, the Anaheim and San Jose beat you. I mean, if you struggle tomorrow against New York, a change has to be made, in my opinion. It's not, personal. I think Derek Lalonde's a great person. I think he's a phenomenal human being. But at some point in time, you have to just put your stuff together and kind of build yourself a great team. And this is not gonna work if you don't win these next 2 games, in my opinion. Boston hasn't been good on the road. Both their goalies are struggling. You look at the New York Islanders; they're dealing with some injuries. Um, they have some issues on their team. You're gonna play them twice in 2 games. They're better on the road than they are at home. So it's gonna be interesting to see what happens with this Detroit Red Wings team. Obviously, if you are going to be honest with yourself, you would have to say to New York today, I mean, because this is gonna post on Thursday, um, and Boston are the 2 biggest games on that schedule because, like I said, You don't want to rely on winning those last 3 games. Like if you're let's say after the New York Islanders game, let's say you're 1 and 2 and you got to win those last 3 games to get to 4. Oh, that's a tough stretch, man. So if Detroit's going to make some moves, if they're going to get to that 4-win barometer, they're going to have to make at least win 2 here, maybe 3, or sweep it all. But the way that they've been playing, it's just it's a little too much to ask for that, to be honest. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with this Detroit Red Wings team. Um, we'll come back and we'll wrap up the podcast on the Detroit Red Alert podcast. Obviously, we have those daily videos that we're going to be doing. So stay tuned to those. Obviously, this is a shorter podcast because Cindy couldn't make it today. She's feeling under the weather. So I was just going to give you a little 45-minute podcast. That way you guys can have your podcast for tomorrow, Thursday, when they play the Islanders. So we will talk to you and then we'll wrap the podcast in the next segment. All right, let's wrap up the podcast. Detroit Red Wings Red Alert podcast on the JC Sports YouTube. Obviously, you can catch daily videos on that YouTube. We have usually daily Red Wing videos. We've had 3 this week, so a lot to look forward to with this Detroit Red Wings team. There's just going to be a lot on the horizon for this team. Obviously, we talked about the schedule coming up. Obviously, we talked about the potential rumors of Sergei Fedorov coming to the Detroit Red Wings if Derek Lalonde is fired. We know Jim Montgomery's out there. We know Gerard Gallant and Joe Quenneville are out there. This is the most pivotal time in the Yzer plan because you feel like right now this is one of the most pivotal moments in the Yzer plan. When you think about what the Yzer plan has truly been about, the Yzer plan has struggled at times to really sustain itself. Obviously, with the free agents that they've accrued with Jeff, trade for Jeff Petrie, Ben Sherratt, Justin Hall, which I still don't get. You've got yourself into a little bit of a pickle, and if we're going to be honest, this is not the pickle that you really wanted to deal with. And what you're seeing from the Detroit Red Wings right now is simply what they are good at. What are they good at? It's their offense that's going to carry the day. Does Derek Lalonde change course the way he's been potentially playing? That'll be the interesting part. But I will tell you this. This is I can't stress it enough. These next 3 games, you're going to learn a lot about the Detroit Red Wings. The next 4 before Thanksgiving, you are going to learn a lot. And there could potentially be some changes. If they lose at home to New York and Boston, then you have to win 4 straight. And it's not a sustainable spot to be in. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with this Detroit Red Wings team. Obviously, this has not been the start that most Red Wings fans have hoped for. I think in year 6 of the rebuild, I thought we would be more ahead than we are right now. It feels like we took a step back in the rebuild. But all in all, this is going to be a situation for the Detroit Red Wings if they can't get themselves out of here. It'll be very, very interesting to see what happens. But it's going to be very interesting to see how they develop and how they go about their things, because this is a pivotal point in the year, and that can't be stressed enough. I told you last night in the video where we talked about Yzerman and the pro scouting department. I don't want to rehash that, but that is an issue. But as we look forward, like there is issues galore with this team. And if Derek Lalonde does not want to switch up course, we're going to see a coaching change. I could see that right now. So this is going to be an interesting time for the Red Wings. It's probably the most interesting time. And I've talked about it ever since we started this podcast, ever since Derek Lalonde's been hired. He struggled in December. He struggled in November. He struggled in those 2 months significantly. I think it's like a 300, 200 win percentage. and it's just not sustainable enough for the Detroit Red Wings to keep doing that. Obviously, when you talk about the Detroit Red Wings and you talk about what they can do to get themselves out of this hole, well, it starts tomorrow, today, against the New York Islanders. You're 16 points. You're at the bottom of the Atlantic. You win two, you're potentially at 20 points. You're going to be passing the Boston Bruins because they got 19 points. You lose two, they gain points on you, and you lose two, especially coming out of the gate at home. It's done over with. Just get rid of it alone if that's going to be the case. But we'll see what happens on the next Red Alert podcast. Cindy will be here. We'll have a longer podcast than we had today. Obviously, I've done a lot of YouTube videos lately, so if you're listening to the podcast and you go, why is it so short? Go listen to YouTube videos. We've had 3 YouTube videos for the Detroit Red Wings this week. Uh, just some daily blurbs, and I'm not going to rehash stuff that I've already covered. Uh, I'll put them in the YouTube thing to the YouTube link in the comments as well. But this is an interesting time to be a Detroit Red Wings fan, isn't it? And it's depressing as hell too, to be honest. So we'll see you in the next podcast. We talk more Detroit Red Wings hockey on the Red Alert podcast. Cindy will be back, and we'll probably be, uh, hopefully, we're talking about some wins. But the way they've been playing, I don't think that's going to be the case. So we'll see you in the next podcast. We talk more Detroit Red Wings hockey. I'm your host, Joe Chap, and I'll see my way out. And thank you for listening. And obviously, stay on the Red Alert podcast page. We'll keep you up to date with all the news and notes that you need to know. But wow, not a lot to talk about in terms of what we've already rehashed and everything. So have a good one. We'll see you in the next podcast. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Joe Chapman. We'll see you in the next one.